welcome to the Blue Swan podcast. Today we have Marjorie DeHey. She's an independent film producer who has raised venture capital and has 33 awards over 12 films. It's all you.
Oh, thanks so much. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. I think it's wonderful to always talk about film and the venture capital world with people and to really dive deep into it because I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about how to raise money, how to make films, how to raise venture capital. And so I'm really happy to discuss these things with you.
Thanks. And so, how did you go about, pushing all of them through a circuit? Because there has to be some sort of a methodology to take, a film through that many awards globally.
Sure. So the first film I directed was Bottle Monster, and what that kind of came out of doing some small films, short films, etc. And then I had a great team of people I had been working with, and you tend to find in the film work, you find your group. You find your team, you find your tribe. So we were excited to have the opportunity, and it kind of came up probably quicker. It's like most things in the world, either you do it at that time period or you never do it. So this really came together very quickly. I'm lucky to work with my fellow producer, Paul Overacker, who has a background in television. He's done probably about 25,000 hours of television as a director, as a technical director. So he has a lot of skill sets that are very complementary to mine. I have a background in film and entertainment, having worked at MGM, having done a lot of things internationally. So it kind of all came together.
Okay. And and so how did you select them?
Like, so the particular film festivals, and I think this is an important thing, is when you're making a film, knowing where you want to land is also really important as making the film. Because often, like, by the time you get through the film and get through like, you're so tired and exhausted making the film that you haven't thought about distribution or how you're going to win awards or where you're going to put your film. So it's really important to do some research. Film Freeway is actually very, very helpful, and that wasn't always around. So Film Freeway is where you can submit for awards, submit things, but it's really about having that story about why you created your film that they really attach to. And this was important film for me. So having that backstory was really important when you write these letters and really reaching out to the film to the like it's hard to put together a film festival, so people put a lot of energy into it. So the people who create these film festivals, it's important to have a personal story that reaches out to them, and it's important to create relationships with them.
Okay. And so in terms of the cast and building relationships and logistics, can you take us through a play-by-play of how you go through creating teams, marketing, and an exit strategy, including anything from waterfalls to whatever might be lying in the legal paperwork at the end of the rainbow?
Sure, sure. I think, because I have a background as a lawyer and in the entertainment space, having worked for MGM Studios, I understood the legal process. But a lot of times filmmakers don't understand that, and they get to a point or where, I have a lot of people approach me and be like, oh my God, I made a film, but I didn't clear this right, or I didn't, sign the right agreement with the actor, or SAG is asking me a ton of questions, and all of those things pile up. So it's really important to really get that legal paperwork out of the way at the very beginning. Like, clear those rights, make sure you understand how to work with SAG and work with the other unions before you get started. Because a lot of times people are like, oh, I'll do that like the day before. And you can't. Like, SAG has a long process. If you're using SAG actors, you need months to clear that, to make sure that there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of things. So it's really a process, and people really need to start. The earlier you start in that process, the easier it is. But if you make the film without having done that, you risk, you can't distribute your film, people can sue you. So really being concise at the beginning, or hiring an entertainment lawyer at the beginning, is going to be a lot less expensive than trying to hire somebody to fix the issues.
Yeah, people will joke that if somebody wants to sue you, there's generally something they can kind of go for. But aside from that, can you talk a little bit about the nuances? So like how the assets underlying some kind of an equity structure in a production LLC, may play into valuations and terminal value, and then any kind of projections, whether it's for individual pieces of intellectual property, or it doesn't seem like films deal very much with patent estate at all unless there's a C corp that's umbrella above the production LLC. And so I would love it if you could touch on that briefly.
Sure, sure. So the first thing you always want to do is like you start with your script, whatever your script is. So if you're starting with a treatment, I copyright and put things under the Writers Guild every step of the way. So if you've created a treatment, put it under WGA. You may or may not want to copyright it, but the second that screenplay is finished, you have it under the Writers Guild, you register under that, and then you also register for copyright. Now, when you get into trademarks, that tends to be things that are more franchise because trademarking an individual film is very difficult. Usually, they'll only trademark like series of films. So, again, you can trademark Harry Potter series, but Harry Potter one film is a different thing. In terms of patent, that's only going towards if you created new technology. So James Cameron creates a lot of new technology. So when he did Titanic, he created actual technology that he patented to, because his visual stuff, like think of Avatar, he created a lot of technology because that was the way the film was presented. But that's really rare for people to create patents around their films. It's usually copyright is where you land in terms of intellectual property.
Right, and then it's easier to sort of rederive from copyrights
Yes.
versus, the joy of parent and child patents.
Yes.
So
You got it.
and so what about for all of the indie producers out there who might not be producing the same way as James Cameron, but aspire to?
Well, I think you brought up a really good point about creating a corporate entity. So there's a few things that you can do is like you can have your production company LLC. So that's your parent company. That's where you hold, your corporation. And then for each film, you can create an individual LLC. And what film companies often do is they create it just for that film. So it's protected within this bubble of the LLC for that particular film. And then, so say somebody sues that film, they're suing that LLC, not the parent LLC, which is your production studio. So you've kind of, for each film, you've created this separate LLC entity. And then often big studios will do this all the time. They'll create a separate entity and then they'll close it as soon as the film ends. And that just is a way to limit liability so that they don't get to the main production company.
Okay, and then can you touch a little bit on some of the fundraising terms? You've mentioned you've raised venture capital, and then they have their own set of terms and obligations in terms of fiduciary duties and usually some kind of board control, but the production LLCs do not have a formal board of directors, although there's probably some kind of reporting oversight. Um,
Sure. So typically on the film side, so there's a bunch of different ways to raise money for film. So typically if you're doing indie, you might start out at a lower rate, like a friends and family. So you get your friends and family, raise some money. That's a very low entry to barrier. There's GoFundMe, Patreon, etc. Then the next level is more the angel funding. So these are people who have been professional private equity investors, etc. They'll give you the larger check. Then the next step you have is the private equity. So these are very rich people who will put money in, and again, more structured. Venture capital really would invest in one film, but they would invest in a portfolio of film or a production company because they want to see a 10x on theirs. So when you talk about venture capital, it's often a corporation, a C Corp out of Delaware with a lot of formalities. Like you will have really detailed, intense agreements with that type of funding and a lot of restrictions too. So that's like at the very high end. So when you see this Warner Brother with like, Netflix and all these mergers and acquisitions, it's like big venture capital funds have come in, et cetera, brought out studios, et cetera. When you're talking about indie, you're talking friends and family, angels, maybe into private equity. So there's just different structures along the way.
Yeah, I once heard a producer joke about how like, someone gives you $50,000 and you have an indie film. And so like the assumption is that with a $50,000 check, you're not going to be negotiating, like a liquidation stack and participation preferences. And so what do people who back indie films or even, full-on productions through companies like Sony or Warner Brothers, generally shoot for in terms of exit multiples? Because in venture you mentioned, yeah, there's the 10x, and then with their fingers crossed, praying to God, there's the 100x or even more. But it's really, really difficult to hit some of those numbers with film alone.
Correct. And this is like, there's a film out now. I won't mention it by name, but they acquired it for $40 million. They're spending $35 million in marketing for a documentary film that just came out, and the theaters are empty. So this is like a big problem because it's like the film was 40 million, but the marketing is always almost the exact budget of the film. So when you see these Marvel films come out for hundreds of millions of dollars, they're also spending hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing. So that's where your distributor comes in with that money. So often what happens is indie films, million, 2 million, whatever they spend, 50,000, etc. They don't think, oh, I'm going to need another 50,000, 100,000 to make noise in the market. So when you're talking about what multiples they want to have, yeah, you want to make as much money as you can, but it's always going to be a portfolio model where it's like 3 out of 10 films are going to make money. So if you're an investor, you're not going to invest in one film. That's always so what I say. The worst investment is to invest in only one film. You want to invest in multiple films, and that's why they invest in production companies or in studios because they know that for every 7 losses, there's going to be 3 wins that are going to be Avatar wins that will pay up for all the losses.
Okay, so they're almost like venture capitalists, but with less grandiose ambitions.
Well, they have like a lot of, it's always like the worst things to invest in are racehorses, restaurants, and films, because those are always real people, but people do it because they're fun and they're sexy and they're like, oh, I invested in a film. And I had a friend who's a venture capitalist, and he called me one time and he's like, I made the worst decision ever. He's like, you're gonna laugh, but I invested in a film, and the film happened to do really well. But he was like, I don't know what I was thinking because there was like no guarantee. There's like, you can make the best film with the best actors out there, but it could hit the market at the wrong time, or a better film could come out, or a different film could come out. You could be competing with Scream 7 and you could have this Oscar-worthy film that just isn't going to get the traction because everybody's going to this action-packed Marvel movie.
Okay, and so in terms of sort of selecting the aspects for the award, so people always talk about the human element in film, and whether it's a Taurus award-winning fight scene or something else, there's always acting. It doesn't matter if it's supposed to be action, romance, etc. And so, what's the recipe for that in terms of producing films with the award ratio you have?
I think part of it is having those actors who care about the film. That's always going to go that extra mile because you could have somebody who has a ton of talent, but if they're not passionate about your film, it's going to come off. Or you could have somebody who's has less experience, but they're so passionate about the film. And this is how people like Jennifer Lawrence like blows up because if you go back to Winter's Bone, it's like you could see she's 1000% in it, but then you could see another film like Red Sparrow that she did later on in her career that she just wasn't as in it. And she's a fantastic actress, but there are roles that you see that sometimes people are so into, and it may not be that A-list, movie, but it's so brilliant. And I think it's a struggle actors have, and you probably know this from your acting background, that sometimes things just mesh all together and they come together, and then sometimes it's just like you're trying so hard to get into something that's just not resonating with you.
Yeah, I still don't understand how I'm an actor. That's for my agent to decide. Um, but
It's like we're creatives and we're just cursed with the creative gene.
yeah, pretty much. It's fun though, and so you've discussed a little bit about what happens like after the fundraise, but what are some of the similarities between like the actual process of fundraising? Because like the various stages of the life cycle behind any kind of an equity structure or even an individual asset is very, very complex at a number of stages, and sort of what it is at each stage is a very, very different animal.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. I was watching an interview with Bruce Campbell, and he was talking about, and I don't know, Evil Dead happens to be one of my favorite films because if you go back and watch it, they made it for hardly any money. And Bruce Campbell was saying, like, I got my dad to mortgage our house just because he was going through a divorce and he was so broken, and I just hit him at the right time, and he gave me the money that finished that film. And if you think about that, wow, his dad is mortgaging the house, but 30 years later, made everybody's career on that particular film. It's Sam Raimi, it made Bruce Campbell, and they're still recycling that IP. But when you start, you don't necessarily know that you're going to have like the next Scream or the next Saw, etc. But things do come around, like things that you don't know when it's going to come around again, but like just doing the act of creating it is so important. So I do encourage people just to go do it. And when I talk to like Guillermo del Toro or whoever we've talked through the years, is like just make it, just make it, just figure out how to make it, because there's so many filmmakers out there that never made films, and that's sad.
All right. And so when it comes to sort of the end game, so the valuations for films, when you look at the ones that have the highest revenue multiples in terms of initial funding, it's almost always horror, Disney, and then something that has to do with God. It's like those three categories in film are the ones that will get 10, 100x. And it could be Saw, it could be Paranormal Activity, it could be, anything in between. And so how did you go about that with Bottle Monster? And then what is your opinion on sort of film sector and then projected outcome?
Sure. I think paranormal gets used a lot, but that's a really interesting example because they say they made it for $12,000. But then what really happened is the studio came in and put like a bunch of money into it, hundreds of thousands of dollars to really make it what it was. So when people are like, well, this started at 12, $1,000 and it made a bazillion dollars. It's like Blair Witch. It's like it started here, but it was the studio coming in and pumping that marketing machine. So I think the things that you look for when you're trying to raise money or trying to get that, multiple at the end is, who's my market? Who am I targeting to? What's my social media presence? I do think that like having actors that have a good social media, like that's what distributors look for. Like we had to go through what's everybody's social media on this, etc. It's like, and then I think, everybody's like, we shot during COVID, so we knew we weren't going to release during COVID, so we knew we were going to the streamers. So which was fine because we just knew that. And it was kind of sad because we didn't get the big, theatrical thing. Like, but on our second film's Immortal Thieves, we had the big, film festival launch and then a lot of pickup after that. And honestly, it's being at those film festivals, a lot of distributors go, it's the networking that's going to get you that deal. It will always come down to your networking.
Good God, that is so LA. It's just like your network is the air you breathe and the
Yes.
blood that courses through your
Yeah.
veins and entertainment.
But you don't have to be an amazing networker. This is what you have to be, a genuine networker.
Yeah.
Because I have a friend who's a networker and he shakes all the hands and he goes around, but he doesn't create the genuine connections. Where if I go to an event, I'm like, I want to meet three people and create a genuine connection with them. Because that's to me what networking really is if you have that genuine connection, you're going to want to work with that people. If you're just shaking hands and being like, oh yeah, yeah, we'll connect, like that doesn't mean anything. It's really, so when you think about network, it's not about meeting 100 people in one room. It's about creating genuine connections with people because they may not be the person who funds your film, but they're going to be like, you know what, my friend Bob is really like great at this. He, loves to do this. They're going to be, so it may not be the person you meet that day, but the person they connect you to. And then they've created this genuine connection that they create this trust. And they're like, yeah, I really want to work with you or have my friend and open up my circle to you.
And that's one of the things I appreciate more about entertainment in LA because like you see the serial networking people a lot in corporate because like every single board member, depending on when they came in, may be bound to a separate set of provisions. And then it's like anyone under a multi-year employment agreement is under a separate set of provisions, investing clauses from the executive team. And so like the incentives and the politics throughout any kind of a larger organization gets a lot more complex. Whereas, when you have all these actors represented by various unions, and it's like, okay, you might be here for a day, a couple weeks, a month, and then sort of that's it. And so it's much easier to actually be human about it, and instead of sort of hiding behind whatever legal team everybody has put together. Um, and so with that in mind, so what's your advice for aspiring indie filmmakers?
So my advice is to really have people read your scripts, really have people. I did the whole UCLA screenwriting course, and people are like, you've read hundreds of screenplays. And I'm like, yeah, but I want somebody to, I don't want to say like, I want somebody to kind of pull it apart. And I know like writers are very precious, and I know I get precious about words. And then you're like, but you have to like lose that. You have to not be precious. You have to be like, okay, if 10 people are telling me that they don't like my character in this particular scene, that it kind of flips them or it like makes this character they loved all of a sudden hate, you got to listen to that. And you got to listen to it when it's pages, because once you shoot, and if that's coming off like we stopped liking this character and scene 7, you've lost it. Like I think it's about creating genuine likable characters, and they don't have to be perfect characters because a lot of times people like imperfect characters. But if the characters are mean or they just genuinely don't come across as, they come across as puppy kickers in the first scene, for lack of a better word, nobody's gonna like that. Like we watched a film and we're like, we don't like any of the characters in this particular film, and I won't say what it was, even though they're A-list actors, but there was nothing that connected us to like them in the beginning of the film, and we went through the film going like, we have no vested interest. So I know they always say create likable characters. Well, you need to create relatable characters that you want to root for, even if they're the bad guy. We root for bad guys without even realizing it, but it's okay because there's something still human about them.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you mentioned that. Like there's this scene in one of the Daredevil episodes where there's this lawyer talking, and she basically says like, there's only one thing that people hate more than puppy kills, and that's litigators. And so, like that's a very hateable character that nobody would root for. But it's like you watch Scarface, and it's hard to empathize with a guy who sort of numbly stares at someone getting mowed down with a chainsaw, but at the same time, like, he's technically the protagonist of the story. And so it's halfway relatable.
Yeah.
All right.
So he's a bad guy, but it's still Scarface's movie, and they've created that like around it. Like The Godfather, it's like there is a lot of bad people in The Godfather, but we've created this like bond. It's like Psycho. They say there's a scene in Psycho where the car is sinking and it stops. And then all of a sudden, everybody in the audience is like, sink, sink, sink. And you're like, wait a minute, I'm rooting for the bad guy who just brutally murdered a woman that I want him to get away with it. And it's the psychology behind Hitchcock films is amazing. But if you study like Psycho from a psychology, all of a sudden you're rooting for the bad guy. And you're like, no, I'm not. And you're like, oh my God, I am. But they created it such a compelling character that really got to people.
I admittedly have never seen Psycho, but I will be sure to take a look. And so you've mentioned a lot when it comes down to everything from financial layouts to legal terms to personnel and the cast and everything. And so what has involvement and membership with the Producers Guild and the Television Academy shown you about how things tick behind the scenes?
And I'm so glad you asked that because, like, the Producers Guild and the Television Academy, I'm so honored to be a member of both of those because it's beyond like it's so much education. Like Producer Guild is very proactive about educating producers because there's not really a course you can go and be like, I'm going to learn how to be a producer, because when you're a producer, all of a sudden it's like you're thrown into a fire that you don't know what's going to be on fire any given day. Which is like, you kind of really, a lot of producers are like, I just had to learn on my feet because that's like, you don't know what problem you're going to solve. So you could take years of film class and you know how to make a movie, but then, like, what if the permit guy says, hey, you didn't like mess up the permit, or the police show up when, even though you have a different police department. So there's all these like things that you're solving on the fly. So the Guild is great as that. TV Academy is great on they have so much education. I think it's so so many people talking about how they failed and how they made it. And then you hear these stories and they give you a lot of hope because sometimes this is a very like hard industry. It is a hard industry and you want to have hope. And I think both of those organizations are so amazing at promoting education and just lifting up the industry. Excuse me.
No worries. Okay. And then, so I have to ask this, and partially for selfish reasons, but so how do you see AI sort of impacting the industry, whether it's with pure AI driven filmmaking or just sort of what the unions are doing with, I guess, these funds that essentially are representing any kind of pooled equity or income from AI avatars that are representations of real life actors.
I'm really glad that you asked this question because I think it's really important for actors to really read their contracts because there have been a lot of contracts going out and in any agreement you sign as an actor, we can use your image, your likeness, da, 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 and they get all these rights. So you just have to be really careful that that doesn't say that they can use your image in other films or image in other things or alter your image in such a way that it's no longer really your image. And it's just very important because SAG has worked very hard to protect actors. And I think SAG, they have a lot of restrictions for a reason. And, Duncan Crabtree Ireland's an amazing lawyer. I've known him for many, many years, and he heads up SAG, and he is 1000% about protecting actors. And I think it's important to protect actors because, yes, could we create AI actors? Yes, but that doesn't like Tom Cruise AI. No, if you see Tom Cruise in a room, he is energy. He is like getting people excited. And like, what, we're going to have this screen of a fake person. So I still think that people need to connect to a human being. So that's why I think AI, maybe it's great for, stunts or whatever. It helps people, but I'm a big believer in physical is always going to look better on screen because you can watch some of the movies and you're like, oh, I can tell that's a green screen. And it kind of loses you sometimes. So I'm about physical effects. I'm about physical, but AI can help in certain ways, but it just needs to be used responsibly. One of the things also about the film festivals is people always think very local, like I only want to be in LA, and LA has a lot of great film festivals and amazing, like where I do a lot with like the Culver City Film Festival and the Golden State. The guys who run that are absolutely incredible, probably one of the best film festivals in the world. But there's also other places in the world where your film will do well. Like our film did, like Bottom Monster did really well in Sweden and like really well in Italy, and it really like spoke across the globe to and people were like, this is insane, like the traction we were getting in Europe and other places where like in the US you have a lot of competition, but sometimes in Europe if you have a different, and I did a lot of work in Europe, but it's like there different things talk to different cultures. So I'm always telling people like the US huge market, but there's other huge markets out there. So like really where is your film getting traction and then really connect to those film festivals.
Okay. So think globally, distribute globally.
Correct.
Okay.
And also like if you get traction, also global, like I won awards in Sweden because for some reason the film was doing really, really well in Sweden. So we were like, okay, well, we have a market that really loves this.
And was this just sort of something that happened, or like were you actively working with people like in Sweden, or any kind of logistical
That was
reasons?
very organic. That one was very organic. We did target certain markets internationally that we knew it would do well because there's certain markets like in Japan, you can't really sell a ghost story in Japan because of their strong belief in ghosts. And there's like a lot of different things that they have about beliefs in ghosts and how ghosts should act, and there's like, and ours wasn't a ghost film, but I'm saying if you're writing it, culturally know like where your film could go really far.
Okay. So Ghost in the Shell is perfect for Japan, but anything like The Ring is just not gonna fly. Cool.
Well, actually I think The Ring was that
I think
Korean or Japanese, or
it
it was actually based on an Asian film.
yeah, it
Yeah.
may have been.
Yeah, but then there
Um,
was a special treatment of how, yeah. But again, yeah, so it's like certain things will work in other countries, certain things like, nudity in China, very frowned upon. It's like things like that. And China's a huge market.
I bet. Did you do anything with international licensing? And so you received awards internationally, but like the licensing agreements internationally and how that actually works can be very, very, very nuanced because if something is being transcribed into a separate language, there may be like an entirely different set of royalties or residuals for like that language release.
Yeah, and when we worked with Premier Digital, and we loved working with them, and they handled all the localization, they handled the international rights, etc. Because to take that on as an indie film, you would have to know so many sales agents around the globe, etc. So you just have to find the right distribution partner, and that's why the film festivals help, because that's where you meet the distributors, etc. Because distribution is such a, like, a lot of the companies that were around before COVID aren't around anymore because they lost that theatrical distribution. So they have again narrowed down, but there's so many good distributors out there, and there's really good sales agent. If you don't know how to do it yourself, giving sales agent a percentage can be a very good thing. It's just like you have to read that contract, because some will say, okay, you're going to give me this and you're going to pay for me to go to Cannes and Venice and Berlin, and that's all going to take out of your revenues, and all they like start cutting down the money that you get, and you end up with 2 cents, and they end up paying for, and they'll do it for multiple films. So you have to know, for sales agents, like, okay, you're paying for me to go to Cannes, and so are 10 other people. And you're like, wait a minute. So you have to just find really good sales agents and distribution companies. And it does take some work to find those.
Yeah, it's like welcome to the world of high finance
Yes.
where all of the expenses are covered and everything. It feels really good, and then actually payouts start happening and poof.
Yeah. Done.
All in the hands of the institutions.
Correct.
All right.
You know how it works.
You know, unfortunately, I have lived through that cycle, but I have to say that I feel like almost anybody in either production or especially venture capital and private equity has sort of gone through the whole gamut, and that's just part of the game that people have to play.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the best advice, and this is what we like get told by director after director. And, we've met a lot of famous directors through the years who are always so wonderful and generous with their time. So, what's amazing about directors is if you're in a room full of people, rarely do people know who the directors are unless they're very well known. So these are the people who will happily talk to you. Like, directors want to talk about their films. They want to talk about your film, and everybody's kind of flocking to the actors, because the actors are like, I'm here for a press junket. Hi, hi, I'll smile, I'll smile. But directors actually want to talk about films. Like, if you've ever like met Guillermo del Toro, he will talk about films. He loves to talk about films. He would talk about every single film. He is one of the most genuine, thoughtful, insightful, helpful people in the world, because he loves film. Like, Quentin Tarantino loves film, and they love to talk. So they're not shy people. They love to talk to people. So I do encourage people, if you're out and about, be of course respectful of their time, but like a lot of times, they're happy to answer a question, or they do want to engage.
Cool. I think that is a little bit different from some of like the fund managers out there who like sort of just like lock themselves in a room unless they're in a due diligence meeting.
Yeah.
So
Well, fund managers, they get pitched thousands of things all the time. And I think that's also like, I get pitched a lot on different things, and I like make horror films. I love horror films, and people are like, I have a kids film with like, and I've worked with children before, and I like working with children. I don't like working with studio teachers, and I probably shouldn't say that, but like, the restrictions of working with children really narrow your live production time. So you only have so many hours to get things through, and the more children, the longer your shoot's going to be in terms of days. So I've done it. It was a great experience, but I like horror films. So people pitch me like all sorts of things, and I'm like, know who you're pitching to too. Like, it to me, it means like, you know nothing about my background, you haven't read my background, you haven't watched my movies, and you just want money. And like, I will never invest in a film that just wants money, because you want smart money. You want people who love your project and understand your project, etc. But also do your research on that person before you pitch, or it's never going to go anywhere.
I imagine, and so how does the due diligence and the compliance end of film investing and production sort of compare to venture? Because you worked at an Irish venture for the Irish government with hundreds of companies, and so I don't even want to ask about how many millions of pages of legal documents you must have had to look at, but how does film production either in indie or massive corporate sort of compare?
So I think indie, like people should be more aggressive about their legal at the beginning. And usually it's like after issues come up, they were like, oh, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had done this, or I wish I'd done this. When you're at like the venture like level, you're so many documents. It's like it's a different world between, because film is like people invest in film or passion and creatives, people with a lot of money that want to like support the arts. So think of them, I almost think of them as benefactors more than, or they're a production company and they're looking for their next big hit and they invest that way. Venture capital, they get like hundreds of thousands of people submitting ideas. So that's a very buttoned down procedure. That's very much you have your deck, you have, your experience, you know what you're going to do, etc. Where films, it's like I've had people pitch me films like logline, etc. I'm like, where's your deck? Where's your market research? Where? And they're like, all I have is this and half a screenplay. And you're like, okay, you do need to button up more. And but a lot of times, they can get friends or families or angels who just like the concept and they're like, okay, here's money. You can't do that for venture capital. You have to have everything really buttoned up, and then the legal process is months and months of with the law firms and back and forth, and so it's a very like the higher end film you go, the more money you raise. It's like anything. The more money you raise, the more legal is involved.
Yeah, so I probably shouldn't have laughed, but it's like showing
Yeah.
up to raise money for a film with half a copyright. It's like I don't even think like you could get a response from like an investment bank or any kind of an institutional investor with that because it's like
They're not even gonna like do one film.
no,
Like they're not even gonna take that. They have people who like just bat all the time. And like if you get that meeting with a venture capital, like you better be buttoned up and you better know everything about everybody you're talking to. It's your due diligence too. Like
on both
that's important.
sides, yeah.
Yes.
And so okay, so you mentioned sort of the process of sort of having everything in terms of scripts and cast sort of hammered down at the beginning. What about like actual copyright registration and either derivative copyrights from something like a screenplay or anything else of this sort? Sort of how much of that needs to be in line? Can some of it be registered with serial numbers and then other copyrighted assets are sort of underway? Like, how is that sort of managed in terms of film financing?
So I think it's important because a lot of times people don't do that. So say you have a book and people have optioned the book, but they let their option expire and then they try to still go out and pitch it. You can't do that because you've lost the underlying rights. Now, myself, I write screenplays, so I write it, I finish it, I copyright it. Done. Now, what I've seen happen is two people coming together, hey, let's write a screenplay together without putting together a collaboration agreement. So what happens when you guys get into a bitter fight, which happens, who owns this? Because what happens is nobody owns it and it sits and it could be like the best screenplay ever and nobody can do anything because it's jointly owned and these people don't talk. And I've seen movies just fall apart, even with funding, because they didn't sort out what's going to happen in that screenplay if you guys no longer talk. Because they're like, we're best friends, we're going to be together forever. And like I've rarely seen I've seen a few collaborations work really well, but it's very hard. So, know that before you enter in, because I get a lot of people approach me and they're like, let's write a screenplay together. And I'm like, thank you, no. I'm like, thank you. I don't want to collaborate on writing with somebody only because I've seen so many horror stories. I'm not saying that it won't happen in the future. I'm saying like, hey, if you want to be a part of this film, there's a lot of things that you can do. You can, it depends what skill set you bring, but in the terms of writing, it's very hard to have a joint ownership of a screenplay, especially if you're a main writer and then somebody kind of collapses in it really starts to create a very messy chain of title.
And and so like they will option scripts before there's a registered asset. And so everything with the sort of the collaboration agreement, like that would precede sort of the copyright registration where people would have both names on the asset itself.
Well, if you're gonna like how I would do it is if you're gonna write something together, I would have a collaboration before you put any words to paper. Once you get the screenplay together, I would jointly copyright that one together. That protects both of the people there. But then there's really needs to be one person who can like really assign it out, like who can sell it, etc. Who like so you figure out what that relationship's going to be because often you'll get to a studio and the studio might be like, we want one writer, you know, it's like, you know, or you've contributed more, we're going to move forward with you, and they'll just tear the team apart, and they don't have emotions about it. They know who's the better writer, they know who contributed more, and I've seen things like that happen, and then people get in and then it kills the film because they're bickering over here where I'm like, studio over here wants to give you a lot of money, so you guys need to figure it out, and they couldn't because they both got stubborn and, you know, butted heads. So basically how I would do it is I write a script, you know, copyright register. If you option a book, you option the book. Then, you know, you can have a shopping agreement as a producer. I'm going to go around shop this to everybody. You could like, but I stick to original IP that I create just because it's so much easier. But again, just make sure whatever you do, you make sure you protect your interest in your rights because I've seen producers dumped, I've seen writers dumped, I've seen everybody dumped along the way without protecting their rights. So that's why talking to lawyers, talking to people ahead of time really, really helps.
Yeah, that's kind of what happens when institutions get involved.
Yes.
And so speaking of institutions, you know, it's like the committees and the boards behind the institutions are ultimately pulling the strings. And
Mm.
so before we wrap up, can you talk about how those boards and committees work at both guild and then festival level?
Sure, sure. That's again, every festival is a little different in terms of who they have. Who, you know, typically they'll have some big wig names as judges because that's the thing. But there's always going to be sub like, you know, parts where people who read the whole scripts. So, you know, the key is like first 10 pages, you have to make an impact because they're not going to read past 10 pages unless you've made an impact. Honestly, now it's like the first 5 pages, unless you've brought them in the first 5 pages. And that's why I'm talking about like screenwriting classes and having people read your work. Like if you don't pull people in those first 10 pages, they're gone. And it's also like the other thing when you're like, you know, and that's on the screenwriting festival because, you know, you can get many letters. So get best screenplay, and then that kind of boosts you to sell your film later. When the actual film is there, it's really about catching again people in that first 10 minutes. Are they vested in your film? What have you done to really tie them into your film? And we've all had this where we're watching a film and we're like, I can't wait to see how this ends. Like I can't remember the film that was made, and it was such a big. It was a Netflix, and it was about a heist, and it was such a big. It went on like it's an Army of Darkness, and then they made a second one, whatever. But it was like there was a heist in a horror film, and it was a very cleverly done. But like you like the characters, even though they're like technically the bad guys, they're out robbing people, but you liked them so much, and they were so quirky together as a team that it moved, and you're like, okay, I'm hooked. But you know, then you watch other films, and you're like, okay, it's really slow start, but I'll give it a little more time. And then, you know, it's like, okay, I'm not there. So, and it's harder to connect, you know, get people's attention. Like Netflix literally has a formula of like, in minute one, you have to do this. In minute seven, you have to do this. At the end of their TV series, they're like, okay, in the last 2 minutes, we have to have a cliffhanger. It's like those old TV show. There was a TV show called Cliffhanger, and everything ended on a cliffhanger because they want you to keep watching. You're like, oh, okay, I'll watch 4 more minutes so I know how the cliffhanger, but you end up watching 7 episodes. So, you know, there's these tricks that now streamers do to catch people.
I think Matt Damon and I want to say Ben Affleck, where supposedly did sort of like a more intense version of that before for some kind of like a short series. This is almost like a vertical format where you may be doing cliffhangers in seconds and maybe not even minutes.
Mm.
So it's interesting to hear. Okay. I I can listen or sort of go over any more questions you want. I think that's pretty much the list.
Yeah, and I do want to say on the Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, they did this new film called, I think it was like The Rip. And what was so interesting at the beginning, you don't know who's the good, they're cops, but you don't know who the good cop is or the bad cop is. And at any given point in that film, you're like, oh, maybe it's him, or maybe it's her, or maybe it's him. They did a good job in terms of flipping characters. Like, it's very hard to make like Sam Rockwell and Three Billboards Outside of Missouri was great because at the beginning you're like, God, I really hate him. There's like nothing he can do to redeem himself. And then he has this absolute flip at the end, like going like, oh my God, he's such an amazing person. And you're like, what just happened? And that's like brilliant writing. That is really brilliant writing when you have this character you cannot stand, and then all of a sudden you love him. Or Breaking Bad, here you had this innocent guy who just wanted to accomplish, you know, like get money to help, because of cancer. He's like a school teacher. And then by the end of it, he's the bad guy. But because you loved him so much at the beginning, you just kind of pull that love through the end. And then he's become this like horrible person who's okay with killing people. But you see this arc, and that's like kind of a reverse arc. But like the worst thing to do is have your character be the exact same person at the beginning and the end of the film. Somebody's got to have an arc. Somebody's got to change. And you do see films sometimes where they're like, even the superhero films, they're always the same person at the end. You like the ones where they actually learn something or change, but that's kind of my problem with superheroes is they kind of end up the same person at the end. There's not much arcs in there. So,
I think that's fair. So this is just my personal opinion. Matt Damon is also really, really brilliant in those kinds of movies, whether it was Good Will Hunting, because he actually dropped out of Harvard before he went into film, or The Departed, where sort of everybody's kind of the bad guy, but some people are more bad than others. Yeah.
yeah, so I definitely recommend that. That was an interesting watch just to see. Like I always watch like who is changing through the film because for me that matters is like do they change and why do they change? Do they change for the better or the worse? But the world is always going to change you and you have a choice to change for the better or for the worse. And
Okay.
that's what characters do in the movies.
Cool.
So
Awesome.
excellent.
All right. Thanks again for doing this.
Thank you so much. It was so great talking to you.
Likewise.